So those two things, news coverage and a somewhat dampening of some of the violence. The third thing that got accomplished was that people actually got registered to vote, which of course was the whole idea in the first place. These various marches and demonstrations all had as their destination the county courthouse in whatever county it happened to be. And the whole idea was that there would be support for a few courageous people who would go into the courthouse and try against all odds to register to vote. Against all odds, you say. How hard was it for you to register to vote? Anybody here have a horror story about when you registered to vote? Probably not. But in Mississippi, every story was a horror story. Just getting into the courthouse was a big deal to start with. Most of the courthouses set up quotas or limits, and so they would let people in one or two at a time. How would you feel going into an all-white hostile environment, assuming that you're not white, and knowing that you were going to go and stand or sit in front of a voter registrar who was going to give you a long and complicated test on the U.S. Constitution and the Mississippi Constitution, which you had to pass before you could register to vote? If I gave you a test tonight on the Minnesota Constitution, I'll bet you most of you wouldn't be registered to vote by the time we'd finish the test, you know. And that would be if I was a fair scorer of the test, which of course they weren't. So getting to register to vote wasn't just, I think I'll go down there and give them my address and my driver's license picture, and then I'll be ready to go. It was a hard thing to do. And so when I tell you that over the period of time that we worked in Hattiesburg, literally thousands of people did get to register to vote, that's a big deal. So that's what was going on. I went to Greenwood, Mississippi. I got to the office of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee about the late afternoon. They handed me a big pile of leaflets, and they said, these two girls here, they're just high school girls, and you are going to go out on the street and go down there and go over there and go over there and come back and hand out the leaflets, knock on doors, announcing tonight's meeting at the church. And so off we went, these two young women and I, handing out leaflets. I think I managed to do that for about half an hour before the squad car came by and picked me and the two girls up and took us to jail. And I thought to myself, gee, I've been in Mississippi now for about 2 hours, and here I am. I didn't actually have to stay in jail because I just got angry. And so I told the guys that were booking me that I needed to have a receipt for every single little thing they took out of my pockets. And they called the chief of police, and so I began talking to him about this, and he said, "Where are you from, boy?" And we had a conversation, and the end of it was that he thought I should be doing this same kind of work back in Illinois rather than in Mississippi. And at one point, one of the young women whispered in my ear and said, they arrested a whole bunch of other people this morning, and they're all in jail too. And so I said to the chief of police, I think you ought to get those other people out of jail and let us go, and we're all going to go back and go to the office. I got away with it. They actually let I think I just caught them by surprise. They let the others out of jail, and then I said, "You're going to take us back, aren't you?" Because this was a fairly long hike back across town, and they said, "No, you can walk." So instead we had a parade and sang some songs, and So that was my first few hours in Mississippi. What did I take away from that? What I took away was a really haunting picture in the back of my mind of the eyes that I looked into in every one of those houses where I knocked on the door. Remember me? I'm white. Remember them? They're not. Somebody would answer the door, sometimes not answer the door, just look through a crack. And what they saw caused them to be fearful. And I'm not used to creating that kind of fear in people's eyes. And so I thought a lot about that, and I went back home after that week, and I thought about it, and I prayed about it, and I said, I'm going to go back, and so I did. And, excuse me, my family went with me, not right away, because at that point I didn't know exactly what awaited us down there. It took me several months to get organized and find a place where they could live with me. But that was the kind of experience, and that was the kind of world that I wandered into by going to Mississippi. And that's the kind of world that Dr. King grew up in, worked in, lived in, and finally died in. But as I say, the difference was that I just lived there for a few years and then left. And he put his life on the line there. What were we doing? What were all of us doing? What was the purpose? Well, at least one purpose was voter registration. That was at the center of almost everything people were trying to do. But beyond voter registration was a much larger picture. In Hattiesburg and the surrounding smaller communities, as Teresa mentioned, we organized and we ran what was called freedom schools. And they were just plain old schools, just like any other school. Often, though, the classes were held outside under a big tree or in a building that had become unused by someone else, sometimes in small churches. And the classes were age sensitive, so there were some classes that were for little kids, some classes that were for high school kids, some classes that were for adults. And the basis of the curriculum had kind of two parts to it. One was that it was whatever the volunteers who came to Mississippi knew how to teach. But if any of you have ever been a teacher, you know that you can go into a school and people can hand you a curriculum, and even if it's not your forte, you somehow learn how to teach it, right? And that was what was going on. Many of the people that were doing the teaching weren't educators per se, trained in education, but they were eager to see that the word got out about black leaders, about black history, about citizenship, math, the arts, everything that you would hope that people would learn in a regular school but weren't learning. These freedom schools were scattered pretty much all around the state in many, many different locations. There were 5 of them in Hattiesburg, and then there were 2 community centers, one in the downtown part of Hattiesburg and another in a little outlying community on the edge of town. And the community centers were like a good community center should be here or anywhere else. Probably not as fancy as our YMCA, but in that general category. Places for people to come and hang out and do things together in safety and in a good way. I could go on for a long time about stuff that I experienced and things that I did. I think I'd like to focus on Dr. King now. the first time I met Dr. King was in Brown's Chapel in Selma, Alabama, just before the second of the three attempts to get a march going that would eventually go from about 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery. And my experience of him was like the experience of everyone else who was there. I just simply sat and watched this man work his magic on the people that were in the room, talking pretty much extemporaneously, in other words, not a prepared speech or from notes, but just talking from his heart about what was involved in becoming part of a movement of people along a busy highway from this town of Selma to another one, the state capital. At any one time, that little church probably held, 300-400 people, and then it was full. And so I went there. My purpose in being there was that one of the things I had learned how to do while I was in Mississippi was to find a good, dependable source of tents. Now that may seem strange to you, but nobody else had figured that out. And people kept needing to have tents because they kept marching someplace where they had to be overnight. And I found a guy in Atlanta who happened to be white, but who had a lot of tents, and who would rent them to me at a reasonable price and deliver them on trucks. And all I had to do was find somebody to help a small crew that they brought, set them up and take them down, and he'd come and take them back when we were done with them. And so I had become sort of the tent man. Everybody came to Bob whenever they wanted to find tents because I had the contact. I don't know why it had to be that way, but it was. I guess it was kind of fun. If you are thinking about moving a group of people over a 50-mile distance, it's not going to be a day-long hike. It's going to be several days. In fact, probably 6 days. And so the way the hikes would go, the way the march would go, was that in the front line would be Dr. King and other notable people. And that varied from day to day, and even over the course of the day, depending on different times of the day. People would kind of rotate up toward the front, because of course that's where the pictures are taken, right? At the front. And so at the end of the first day, there had to be something for the people to do, and a place for them to lay their heads. And even partway through the day, there had to be food. And for people that got hurt, maybe sprained an ankle or had somebody throw a stone on them, there had to be medical care. You don't just get out and walk along the road. So there had to be food, medical care, protection, physical protection, and then there had to be a place to hang your head, lay your head at night. So we actually created little tent cities every single day. You have to be able to handle the whole business about latrines. Everything has to happen. The food showed up on the back of pickup trucks in huge 50-gallon garbage cans, all warmed up back at Selma. And everybody had a little, it was just like the Army, everybody had a little thing that they could put their food in, and you'd line up there and you'd get something out of each of 2 or 3 garbage cans, clean garbage cans, and that would be your dinner. There was a program each evening at which people spoke, and And then there were guards. There were people that patrolled the perimeter of the whole little tent city to make sure that under the cover of darkness, bad things didn't happen. One of my favorite memories of Dr. King through that period of time was an evening. I think it was probably the first evening, but it happened again on several other evenings. He did not have to sleep in a tent. They rented a very small camping trailer that they moved in there so that he could at least have some privacy and have a little bit more comfortable bed than maybe some of the other people. And I remember walking up to him on the end of that first day, and I looked, and then I looked a second time. He was sitting down on the step on the edge of this little trailer, and when I looked the second time, I realized that he had his shoes off, and somebody had gotten him a couple of buckets of warm water, and he had one foot in each bucket. And there he sat with his pant legs pulled up and his feet, one in each bucket. And I and various other people joined in kind of teasing him about the fact that if he didn't feel like he had to wear his go-to-church shiny black Oxfords while he was marching out there, and instead he had some Nikes or something, maybe he wouldn't have to sit there with his feet in the buckets. And I can honestly say that never in all of my memory of Dr. King did I ever see him really laugh or crack a joke, and he didn't laugh or crack a joke then either. He just simply said, "I have to wear these shoes." That was it, you know? And I think if you think about it a little bit, you can see what kind of mantle he was trying to carry around his shoulders, and about the dignity and everything else that goes with it. He understood the power of an image as well as anybody else, and maybe better than some. And so buckets of water were brought, and that happened more than one night. I guess the other thing that really sticks with me about how Dr. King worked and how he thought was the kind of relationship he developed with the other, I guess I would call them lieutenants, the other leaders in in SCLC. I think that Dr. King probably would have made a good general if he had been in the Army, because he was a person who saw the big picture. He was a good strategist. He could figure out how to do things, and then he could assign other people tasks in order to carry it out. He knew that with a cause as large as the one that he was involved in, there was no way that he, as a single person, was going to be everywhere that someone was needed. And so he was good at delegating. He was good at getting out of the way and letting some of the others that were on his team take leadership. And he was good at developing some of the people that were with him into leaders. And of course, that all became very important sooner than he probably thought it would at the end of his life. SCLC did not fall apart at the point where he died. I want to go back to the whole business about Mississippi and Dr. King. Several times he did fly into Mississippi, into Jackson, which is where the only really large airport in the whole state was. Opportunities for him to meet with people were arranged, and he appeared in order to speak to people there. His